Good morning, everyone. For those that don't know, like I said, I'm Amanda and I am the Business Sustainability and Information Officer at Business Gateway West Lothian. And today we've got a really interesting session that's going to be taken by Mandy, who's one of our consultants on our framework for Intend. So we're just going to talk us through sort of getting started with sustainability in business and what that looks like through the lens of procurement and tendering for contracts. We do have a chat box, so feel free to interact in that. If you've got any questions, pop it in there and we'll do a Q&A session at the end. But if that's okay, I'll just start and hand over to Mandy just to get started.
I work for Intend Business Development, and we are on the expert help framework for the Business Gateway. So we support companies that are bidding for public contracts and help them to navigate that process. And obviously this topic of sustainability comes up a lot in most tenders now. My background actually is in public procurement for 20 plus years prior to going into this line of work. So I understand why the buyers are asking these questions in the first place and why they're focused on sustainability. So hopefully that will give a reasonable perspective from, I guess, both sides of the table. What is the things that you're going to be asked to provide and to be working towards, and why are the buyers asking those questions in the first place, essentially. I hope you can see me okay. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to talk a wee bit about why sustainability is good for business, because this is not just something that you should think about if you want to win public contracts. It's really something that all businesses should be considering. But what actually is sustainability? So we'll chat a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some practical sustainability ideas. The things that we'll talk about today are probably things that you've heard about before or that you're maybe even doing. None of it is new stuff or innovative stuff. It is simple ideas that you could embed within your business that could actually start to make a difference quite quickly. Excuse me. And we're going to talk about the importance of having data and establishing a baseline in terms of where are you at with sustainability at the moment and where do you need to get towards. So all of that stuff is really relevant for any business. And then we're going to speak about public procurement drivers. So why does the public sector care about sustainability? And why are you asked to answer questions on sustainability when you're bidding for public contracts? And we'll look at a couple of tender questions just as examples of the things that come up in tenders. These are real life examples of questions that have been asked, and we'll start to think about how you might answer those and then how we could, I guess, enhance that and make that a bit better. We're going to look at signposting to some other tools and templates. So we only have an hour and a half today. So what we're not going to come away from at the end of this session is a sustainability plan for your individual business. Like, you're not going to get that from this session, but what we want really is to come away with, okay, we've got some good ideas of what we could do, what we need to focus on, but we also then know where to go next to get some extra support to actually take some of these things forward. So I want you to go away from this session with a good understanding, but also then some tools and other places that you can go to actually make this happen. So yeah, that's the agenda. So why is sustainability good for your business? So it is good for your reputation and it builds trust with your customers. It can attract customers, partners and staff. So if your ideal customer is interested in sustainability, if that is part of their value system, that is going to attract them to you if they know that you are focused on this and it's a priority for you as well. Helping you to get prepared for legal and policy changes. So some of the stuff that we talk about in terms of sustainability, eventually that is going to become policy or legislation. So we want to be proactive on that and get moving on these things now. It also is going to enhance your tender scores. So In almost every tender now, there is some element of sustainability. There is some scored, weighted question in relation to sustainability that you need to answer. And we'll go on a little bit to talk about, I guess, the level of detail that is expected in relation to these questions as well. So when sustainability was first on the agenda for buyers, you could probably get away with saying, you know, oh, we switch the lights off and we make sure we don't leave the electricity running at the weekend and things like that. And that would have probably been enough for the buyers to say, all right, they are taking some proactive steps towards being a more sustainable business. Now the expectation is much higher. So you really do need to be showing that you're making a genuine commitment to moving forward towards these sustainable objectives. And it's not just sort of face value stuff. It can also enhance funding opportunities. So more and more now, if anybody's had to fill in things like grant applications, you'll see that this is something that comes up. So certain grant applications, it might be around, we need a carbon reduction plan. We want to see what your goals are in relation to this. It could be about what is your working practices for your employees, lots of different areas, depending on the specific grants, but it's definitely something that can, having a focus on sustainability can boost your opportunities for funding. It's also a requirement for accreditation. So depending on what line of business you're in, there might be accreditations required, and a lot of them will now look at sustainability as part of that evaluation process. And it also saves money for your business. There is investment potentially required depending on what you feel you should be focusing on, but it does overall save cost. Excuse me. So what is sustainability? When we think about sustainability generally, we think about green environmental stuff, and that is a huge part of it. And we will talk a lot about environmental considerations and carbon reduction today. But it's actually about more than that. It's about the environmental, but also social and economic responsibilities. So it's looking at efficient use of resources, but also things like treating people fairly within your workforce and within the supply chain. It's about ethical sourcing within supply chains, and it's about contributing to wider community wellbeing. And increasingly, said this already, but it's built into public contracts. It's an expectation that you are making moves to improve sustainability within your business in all of these areas, in accreditations, and also in terms of the supply chain expectations. Your customers increasingly are going to expect you to have a focus on these things. I'm going to touch on some practical ideas. And as I said before, none of this is going to set the world on fire. It's probably not anything new that you've not heard before. But these are really practical things that you could actually think about implementing within your business. So I would encourage you to consider what that might look like. So the first area we're going to look at is waste. And that's not just about how you dispose of your waste, it's about minimising the waste that's produced in the first place. It's making sure that resources are kept in use for as long as possible, and that products and materials can be reused where possible, repaired and recycled where they do need to be disposed of. So some practical steps that you could take when you're designing your product or when you're designing your service, looking at reuse as part of that design process and looking at designing out waste. So where are the bits where waste is going to happen, and what can you do to reduce that? Looking at packaging waste, this is obviously very product focused, but if you are supplying products, if you use products as part of your service delivery, looking at the packaging that is used. So I've got quite a good example, actually, a company that I worked with recently, PPE and workwear supplier. And one of the things that they were doing for their customers, because it's something that the customers wanted, was they were providing individual wearer packs of the workwear. So say I was an organisation that was ordering workwear on behalf of 100 people, and everybody gets 2 pairs of trousers and 2 jumpers and 2 polo shirts. What the PPE company previously did was they would provide all of that in cardboard boxes for the deliveries, but each individual wearer pack would be provided within a plastic bag within that box. And what they did is they looked at all of their single-use plastics, and they identified that actually this was one of the biggest ways they were using plastic within their organisation, and they've actually now stopped doing that, so they don't individually wrap the wearer packs in plastic anymore. They did have to do a lot of consultation with their customers, because obviously it's very convenient for the customers that they get these individual wearer packs. They can just distribute them out quite easily to their staff. But because they had looked at the data behind the plastic use that they were using, because their customers were specifically public sector who have got a focus on themselves on reducing these things, they managed to reach an agreement that that's what they were going to do. So that's just a little example that hopefully is helpful. Looking at reuse and repair, like instead of buying new all the time, is there things that can be repaired? Could they be reused either in their entirety, or could there be broken down into their individual parts and parts being reused for something else? Setting up recycling streams, so we are going to have to dispose of things at some point, but making sure that as much as possible goes into recycling. And choosing suppliers with take back schemes where possible. So what happens at the end of life? Will your supplier take back and do something else with that item? And also considering products with recycled content and also refurbished options. So that's a big thing in technology in terms of things like laptops, phones. Could you look at refurbished options for those things? Excuse me. Energy. This is the one really that most people think about when they think about sustainability, and I guess maybe because it's easier to measure. So using energy more wisely it's absolutely going to reduce cost for your business. You know, we spoke about like not leaving the lights on when you're not in the business. That's a very simple one, but that is going to have an impact if you are comparing that with you leave them on 24/7 to then reducing that. You're going to see the numbers changing in terms of your electricity bills. And this is an area where really small changes can actually have a big impact. So some practical suggestions, things like LED lighting, smart controls, using timers and sensors, making sure you turn off equipment. Where you are using energy, so you want to reduce that energy use as much as possible, but you're never going to eliminate that. Could you look at sourcing your energy from renewable sources? And monitoring your usage so that you can start to identify where savings could be achieved. Transport is a huge, I guess, culprit in terms of generating carbon emissions. For a lot of businesses, it's a big part of what they generate. So some practical steps that you can take: planning your routes efficiently, to reduce the mileage and the fuel use, encouraging things like car share, public transport, cycle to work schemes, making sure that your vehicles are maintained regularly so they're running at their most efficient, so they're not overusing fuel, and giving your drivers training to drive efficiently, and also then tracking that. It can be really helpful. There's a lot of companies that have that have done that, and they've sort of tracked the results, and it really makes a difference. Excuse me. Some companies as well have limiters on their vehicles as well, and I've found that that saves fuel as well. And thinking about low emission options for vehicles. So when you are purchasing vehicles or you're refreshing your fleet, considering low emission electric and hybrid vehicles. Now that is a huge investment, and that's not something that's going to be possible for everyone, but it's definitely worth at least considering it, looking at, you know, what is going to be the sort of return on investment if you were going to implement these things. And I think as time goes on, these things will become more accessible as well. So it should be a sort of ongoing consideration as well. Sorry, I've lost the slides there. So water and biodiversity, some practical steps that you can take there. Fix leaks, that's one that I should think about because my kitchen tap is currently leaking as we speak. That sounds very basic, but actually when companies have went in and looked at their water use and tried to identify the reasons for, you know, excessive use of water, actually fixing things like leaks has really made such a big difference to the bottom line. It really, it's amazing how much of an impact these small things can have. Things like installing water saving taps, toilets, appliances, using rainwater harvesting. I've seen that used in some companies with great effect. So they are harvesting that water and reusing it. One thing that I wanted to put in there was considering your use of AI tools. So we all use AI in our daily lives at the moment. Interestingly, a lot of people are using AI to write their sustainability policies, but actually, every time you search on these tools, that is using huge amounts of water within the data centres. So it's not you directly using that water, but your use of that is having an impact. So I guess really just considering what the things are that you're doing and what you're using and what impact that has. And reducing pesticide and chemical use in landscaping. Some of these things won't be relevant to all businesses, but there's just some little things that you could consider. And the final area in terms of the practical ideas is around ethical practices. So that's maybe something we don't think about as much as being part of sustainability, but it absolutely is. And embedding these ethical practices is going to strengthen your business. It supports your staff, it supports the communities that you operate within, and it makes sure that you are working within responsible supply chains. So some practical steps you can take, and we will go on and look at the fair work practices thing as we go on. Paying staff a fair living wage is a really good starting point. Promoting equality and diversity in your recruitment and also within your culture. Supply chain mapping, understanding where the risks exist. This is a really big one because your supply chain is a reflection of you. You really need to understand how your supply chain is operating, because if there is unethical practices happening and those come to light, that's going to reflect on you as a business and your brand. So you really want to be doing that mapping. Where is the services, the goods, where are all these things coming from, and what is happening to make those things available to you? And things like regular audits and due diligence, making sure that anybody that you're working with is working ethically is really important. That was a bit of a whistle stop tour just on those practical things. And as I said, you know, these are not going to be things that are new to you. You might already be thinking about those things. You might already have done some of these things. What I really wanted to touch on here was the importance of having data in relation to these types of initiatives and also establishing a baseline. So why does that matter? if you don't know where you're starting from in terms of sustainability, how do you make informed decisions about what things to invest in or what things to implement? You're only going to know what's going to have the best impact if you can actually understand where your starting point is. So getting to grips with what is your current performance, and then that's going to let you decide where should you be targeting improvements. There'll be certain things that you can do that don't cost any money, that you don't have to invest any real time in. So things like switching the lights off when you're not there, like that's free. That's not really something that you're going to need to invest in. If you are looking at buying electric vehicles, for example, you really need to know what is your current output and what is that going to reduce to? Is that actually going to be something that's worthwhile for your business? Having that baseline and the data also helps you to track progress. So when you know your baseline, you're going to decide what things to implement, but you're then going to be able to track what is the impact of those actions over time. Has it actually been worthwhile doing these things? Do you want to continue doing these things? Are there other areas that you should be focusing on? And that very much informs your target setting as well. And the other thing that's really important about having that data and establishing that baseline is evidence. So having that accurate baseline data and then the subsequent tracking information, that's going to tell you if that investment was worthwhile. It's also going to support reporting for things like audits, potentially certain certification schemes that might be required, and it's also going to help you to provide evidence in tender and funding bids. Just on the data thing before we move forward, so what I often see, I'll probably go on to this as well in the next slides, but what I often seen as a buyer when I was evaluating submissions around sustainability is people would say, we do X, Y, Z, and there was no data to support that. So there was nothing actually that would evidence those claims. And then, even more importantly, there was nothing that actually showed the output or the impact of the initiatives that were being undertaken. So it's almost like a tick box exercise to say, oh, we do this, but actually, where is the evidence of that and what has the impact of that been? So just moving on to public procurement drivers, because if you have bid for public tenders in the past, or if that's something that you're thinking about, you might be thinking, we just want to provide that service, or we just want to supply these products. Why the heck are they asking us about carbon reduction plans and our fair working practices? But behind public procurement, there is a lot of legislation and policy that drives these things. So essentially what the public sector is discovered, or what they are leveraging is they know that they have got power within the marketplace. The Scottish Government realises that it has got significant spend across suppliers within Scotland and beyond, and it knows that it can then use that spending power to help drive policy, to have an influence within the supply market, and can use that to shape behaviour, and to set standards and accelerate change. So some of the things, and we're not going to go into all the legislation today, the Procurement Reform Scotland Act 2014 is a really important piece of legislation, and that basically guides public procurement in terms of what buyers have to do. And within that, there was set a sustainable procurement duty. So buyers within Scotland have a duty to consider sustainability within their procurement processes. We've also got things like the climate emergency declarations, and Scotland and the Scottish Government have set the net zero target, by 2045. So that all sits behind the requirements that buyers are putting onto you. Then we've also got the Scottish Government's Fair Work framework, and things like the Modern Slavery Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty. So it's not just about buying goods and services, it's about all of that other policy and priorities that sit behind that. Can't see that particularly well, but I'll try my best. So I just wanted to pop up a couple of tender question examples, because these are actually things that have came up just over the last couple of months in real tenders that I've been working on with clients. So the first question is around carbon reduction. I'm not going to read the whole thing out because I'm struggling to see it a little bit, but basically what it's asking for is give details of what your organisation is doing to reduce your environmental impact. And specifically, they've asked for things like statistics and dates, and what are they doing to work towards being a net zero organisation. Then it goes on to ask about waste, how you're handling waste, and how you're looking to reduce your waste, and then also any other initiatives around carbon reduction. So as I say, I won't go into the full wording of that, but you can read that back on the slides when they're sent out. So a basic response, if I was a buyer, this is commonly what I would see in response to this question is the bidder would say something like, we conduct annual usage reviews, we have switched our lighting to energy efficient lighting and equipment, we promote recycling so that we can reduce waste to landfill. We look to reduce the fuel consumption in our vehicles, and that might talk about things like driver training and tracking, which we've touched on earlier. We track emissions annually. We're aiming for net zero by whatever date, 2035 I've put in here. And we've got environmental policies and procurement and operations. So that would be like a really sort of basic response to that question. And then I'm just going to dig into that a little bit further in terms of some of the things that really we want to be considering. So what good looks like. So yes, we want to talk about all those things in that previous slide. But when we're saying that we monitor our carbon emissions annually, we actually then want to put some numbers around that. So we could say something like, we conducted a baseline carbon footprint assessment. And what did that cover? That covered our offices, our fleet and our operations in 2024. And overall, our carbon emissions were whatever they were. So you want to get that baseline. You want to have that baseline so that you're showing where did you start from. And then in terms of the net zero plan, you then want to say, okay, so we aim to reach net zero by 2035. That's a great aspiration, but how are you going to get to that point? So what you would ideally be looking to do is have interim targets. So by 2026, for example, we want to have at least reduced our emissions by 10%, and then by 25% by 2030. So you really want to be putting some actual numbers around your targets to show that you have actually really considered how you're going to get to that net zero point. It's not just a bold claim with no substance around it. And what I had added into the updated version that I was unable to present today was just what are the things that you're actually doing to get to those interim points. How are you going to get to that 10%? And then what else are you then going to do to get to that 25%? That's the level of detail really that's needed. So the previous slide is really a very basic answer. You would probably get maybe half marks for that, but really the buyer is looking for much more detail. And when we're talking about things like waste management, again, a lot of bidders will talk about we are recycling, we segregate our waste. That's great, and we monitor it. That's great. But then we also then want to dig down into the numbers. So you want to have targets around diverting from landfill, but you want those targets to actually be based on something. What is the rationale behind that? So what is the point that you're at just now? What point do you need to be getting to? And when are you going to try and get to that point by? And then again, I had added into the other slide, what are the things that you're doing? So when you looked at your current baseline, what was the quick wins that you've already put in place? And really importantly, what impact did that have? How much did that reduce that waste output to? And then what is your targets moving forward? In terms of things like energy and water, again, talking about things like smart meters, energy consumption, we track it quarterly. We're providing things like staff training. But actually then what has the impact been? Has that actually reduced your energy and water usage? And then what else can you do next to reduce that even further? The transport and fleet, transitioning to electric vehicles, this is something that I see all the time as a buyer when I'm evaluating tender responses, is companies will say, we've got electric vehicles. Okay, so now when I'm working with bidders, my question would be, before you had those electric vehicles, what was your carbon emissions that you were generating from your fleet? And by putting those electric vehicles in place, how much did that reduce it by? And then what we might want to look at as, a target, an overall target, but then these interim measures again. But we really want to show that we're thinking about what point we need to get to and how we're going to get there, and we're showing that we're actually tracking the progress. That's a really important part of it, is we don't need to be at the end point straight away, because that's not going to be possible, but showing that genuine commitment to getting there, and making sure that we track that as we go along, because sometimes again those targets might change as well. Once you've generating more information and data, you might start to think, okay, actually putting electric vehicles in place hasn't actually benefited us, so we maybe want to review that and do something else. Procurement and operations, so supplier engagement, we want to encourage low carbon practices of our suppliers and our supply chain. Prioritising, sorry, I can't speak, things like eco-friendly materials. And then in our governance, so we want to actually show that as an organisation we are genuinely committed to this. So you really want to have potentially a sustainability champion, somebody within your organisation that is responsible for driving forward these sustainability initiatives and reporting that to senior management. You want to be showing that there is senior management input on this. Monitoring and reporting. If you are monitoring and reporting, you want to be providing samples or some figures from those reports to prove that you're doing that, to evidence that. And then the training and culture, looking at your staff induction, making sure that you've got the right environmental policies in place and workshops, and that you are committed to embedding these carbon conscious practices, but again that is then actually measured in terms of the impact that that's having. I hope that makes sense. What I think I'll do is, I think it would probably be best to skip over the next example, so we can move on to the next slide, and then if we've got time we can come back to that. I'm just a wee bit conscious of the time and just being a bit careful with that. So what I wanted to do was to go out to some of these websites, but I'll talk about them just now, and then what I might ask you to do, Emma, is there's clickable links within these slides, so we might want to jump out just to some of those, if that's okay. So I just really want to point you towards some of the support that's available. Amanda is probably a much better placed person than me to speak about the support that's available through Business Gateway. But if you look on the Invest in West Lothian website, the net zero support, there is a whole section on there that's got lots of different tools, and there is a sustainability, Amanda, what is it called? It's a sustainability plan, or
So you're right. We've got like a whole toolkit on Invest in West Lothian. It's like that you can click through and see, like it gives you kind of practical tips about like how to make like the reductions that you've already sort of touched on. It's like we call it our net zero toolkit, but it's things about like waste reduction, use of water, yeah, electrifying your fleet, and another key anchor of this support is we actually have some time limited funding as well, which I'm happy just to give a quick overview on just now, Mandy, if that's okay.
yeah, that's great, that's perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so within Business Gateway West Lothian, we have this the newly rebranded, it was low carbon grant, but it's called the Energy Resilience Grant, which really it isn't just about like, how, the energy supply. It's if you're working on any kind of project that is linked to that sort of net zero by 2045 legislation, then we want to talk to you. There's a grant of it's £8,000 where we'd look for an element of match funding, but we've had some really interesting ideas and projects come forward from a diverse range of businesses. So the quick wins, things like LED lighting, solar panels, to something a bit more out there. Unbelievably, actually had a really great project come forward recently about sort of a toilet, which is something that we're quite keen to take forward. So it's just to give you an idea that we want to talk to you, regardless of if you think is that compatible or not. Like we're open to a conversation, and if it's maybe not something that we could take forward, we work really closely with some key partners, Business Energy Scotland, Scottish Enterprise, that we can maybe try and signpost you to other potentially funding streams that could be of use to you. But happy to take any questions on that at the end, or have like a more sort of in-depth meeting about it to discuss anything that you think you would like to, if you want to know more about it, happy to set up like a meeting after this. Is that okay, Mandy?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And as I say on the slides, when you get them sent out, I've put clickable links on those slides, so that will actually take you right out into the Invest in West Lothian website, and all those tools. And I think I did add one, that points you towards that grant as well, if you want to find out more on that. So that's the support that is available within West Lothian, and within that first clickable link with the support from West Lothian, it also then signposts you to some other sort of national resources as well. So I would definitely, as a starting point, I think Emma had put up what the correct name of was it a sustainability starter kit? I think that's a great tool. So I would definitely suggest going and having a look at that after this session, because that's going to be really, really helpful for you. Some of the other things that I put links into, the SME Climate Hub, that is specifically for small to medium enterprises, and it's again, there's really great tools on there in terms of things like getting your baseline and what are the actions that you would want to put in place. We've also intend to actually work with a company called Litmus. I can never say the actual name, but that yellow square or rectangle, the actual clickable link's not in these slides, but they're in my version. That takes you out. They actually work with companies looking to reduce their carbon output on carbon reduction plans. So there's actually some free stuff on their website that you can do as a starting point with that as well. I've linked into the supplier journey, which is a Scottish Government tool, I guess, which is for companies that are going through the public procurement process. But within there's some quite good guidance, specifically on sustainability and some of the things that buyers will be asking of you. In particular, we are often now being asked to provide carbon reduction plans, and there are two different templates that public bodies in Scotland are using in relation to that. So one is a more basic version, which basically is that you are thinking about your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, And then the other one is a much more detailed one, where they're looking for more detailed data and information and target setting and things like that. So it would definitely be worth familiarising yourself with both of those carbon reduction plans, templates, because depending on what it is that you're bidding for, you're probably going to be asked at least for the basic version of that and potentially for the more detailed version. So definitely check that out. And then the Scottish Government also have a number of sustainability tools within that sort of bottom clickable link. There's lots of information in there. A lot of it's about what the buyers are going to be looking for, but I think it's really helpful to have that context. One of the things I wanted to mention, and it won't be relevant to every business, but the government down south actually has something called the government buying standards. So they basically have came up with these standards for specific products. And so, for example, if you were providing furniture, there is a government buying standard for furniture, and a lot of public bodies use these government buying standards within their specifications. So I would suggest have a look at that gov.uk link. Check if there is a government buying standard that's relevant to what it is that you're providing, and if there is, I would suggest familiarising yourself with that to see what you need to be considering in terms of what you're providing. So, like for example, on the furniture one, it is things like it can be disassembled. So they don't want furniture that can't be disassembled, because then that can't be broken down at end of life. They want it to be able to be repairable, so things like spare parts, but it then also goes into detail on things like materials, that basically there's certain materials that they don't want to be used because they're not sustainable. So worth looking at that, but it won't be relevant to all businesses. But it's definitely something good to be aware of, because, as I say, that's something that's incorporated into the actual specifications by the buyers. And then the final thing that I've provided a link on is the Fair Work First guidance. So the Scottish Government basically have this Fair Work First agenda, and I would say that Fair Work First is included in nearly all, it must be like 90+% of tenders where they want you to answer this fair work question. And it is actually a standard question that's asked. So that is something that you could start to prepare your response to before you even have a tender opportunity on your desk. And what it's about, there's different elements to that, but what it's about is things like making sure that you pay people fairly, making sure that your employees have a voice within the organisation, that you're not employing fire and rehire tactics, things like development of your staff, so that you are investing in your staff's development, flexible, family-friendly working policies, and so on. So there's lots of different elements to it. But if you go to that guidance, that basically shows you what does good look like in relation to all of these different elements. And you could start to think about what is it that you're already doing that you could demonstrate in a response. And it also then gives you a bit of a starting point in terms of how could you develop your organisational policies, your HR policies and procedures to move forward with some of these things as well. So that's a really, really good, helpful piece of guidance that I would encourage you to look at. And as I say, Fair Work does come up in almost all public tenders at the moment, so it's definitely worth having a look at. Hopefully you were able to follow the slides okay. Some key takeaways from today. I would say start small. You don't have to be at a point where you're doing everything perfectly, but do make a start and take small and simple steps forward. And I had added on to the updated slide just to say, genuinely commit to this. You know, you want to be shown that you genuinely are taking real action forwards. Make use of those tools, templates and support available to you. There is a lot out there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Go and have a look at those tools that have been linked and make them work for you. And as Amanda said, there is really good support available through the Business Gateway as well. And keep records. We've talked about the importance of data for a number of reasons, but it's no longer enough to have a list of great initiatives. You know, that is going to score minimal points in a tender scoring exercise. What we really need to have is data and actually measuring the impact of the initiatives that you are saying that you're putting in place. Happy to take questions now. Amanda, is that?
Yeah, if anyone has a question, feel free to pop it in the chat box or just pop your hand up. It's quite a small group, so we can manage that. But thanks very much, Mandy. That was really informative. And it's probably worth just coming in here just to reiterate that it's quite interesting that some of the points that you've made about this is what they're looking for with sort of government sort of tender opportunities. We're looking for some similar points when it comes to grant opportunities as well around fair work and environmental policy. So it is really good practice for businesses if they can, you know, embed that into their strategies and their policies. That, you know, because it's becoming more and more relevant. So it's just to make that point as well, that if you can get it done, it opens up a lot of opportunity for you. But I do think we've got a question from Nadia. I think you're still on mute, Nadia.
Sorry, didn't click hard enough. The really good presentation, and actually it's more relevant than I think people realise. So I'm unlikely to be doing any public procurement for myself at the moment. However, I think some of my clients are likely to be doing it, and it might be in an advisory. So I work in software, kind of rather than hardware. And I'm thinking, you did mention about the AI side of things. I think it's about that kind of sustainability in how they develop their software. So the code that they use, they'll be using AI a lot more. Is there sort of specific things, questions that might get asked around that? Because I have worked for bigger organisations, and I've felt, you know, I've been part of, been involved in bid teams, and the format always was, how are you going to do this? How are you going to demonstrate it? What sort of questions might come up in demonstrating how you're using AI to actually build your software?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, because a lot of the time, so the questions need to rely on the buyer's understanding of these issues. So what we often find is, when new things come along, it takes quite a while for that to then filter through into evaluation criteria. So even if we think about just sustainability in general, when the public procurement sustainability duty first came in over 10 years ago now, it was enough just to say, oh, we're a really sustainable green business, and we switch our lights off. And as the buyer's understanding of the issues increases, then the expectations increase. So I think questions around AI are going to start off quite basic, and I think over time they will evolve into something much more detailed, where you're really having to show that. I think the ethical use of AI is something.
Yes, yeah, ethical side, yeah.
Front, but I think that will take time to filter through.
But might maybe be a USP to actually write a little bit more on that, and how you're using it now, like the answers that you gave. You know, here's a good one, here's an even better one. So maybe thinking about actually mentioning ethics, even if they haven't asked that question.
Yeah, and I think as well, like it's kind of about educating the buyers as we go along.
Yeah.
Process, isn't it? Because what I would expect now as a buyer compared with what I expected 10 years ago is completely different. But I guess that came from the really good responses where we actually think, and then the really good responses then become more common and then they become standard. So the standards increase, don't they? But yeah, I would say absolutely. And just on your point about you're a sort of second tier provider, essentially. Some of these questions are asking people to look down their supply chain. So I would expect that the people that you're providing to will want to know these things from you as well. And especially on the carbon reduction plans, for example, when we go right down to the scope 3 emissions, that's actually looking at your supply chain and what emissions the supply chain is generating. So they need you to be able to provide that information so that they can have that full picture, essentially. So yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile to focus on. And then, as Amanda said as well, for things like funding and grants as well, it's not just a procurement thing. So but yeah, definitely second and third tier contractors and suppliers should be considering this as well.
Yeah, you did mention that a bit, and I did take a note because you said I'll prepare beforehand. So yeah, I think that's good advice, Mandy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I've seen a question in the chat box actually.
Right, you've got it, Mandy. That's fine.
Yeah, so that's from Marie, and she said about the carbon reduction plans, is it all contracts or only large ones above 5 million? So it is something that is to be considered in all tenders. It's not included in everything. So like, for example, consultancy services generally, there probably wouldn't be a carbon reduction plan required in that. Any construction related stuff, I'm seeing the carbon reduction plans required there for regardless of the value. And as I said, there is those two different levels. I think that I've linked, I think within those those sustainability tools, there is a link to the carbon reduction plan guidance, but I'll check that and I'll send that over if it's not, because it basically gives guidance to the buyers when they should use each version.
Can I ask, when you thank you very much, first of all, for your presentation. It was really good, very useful. Can I just ask, when you review the carbon reduction plan, do they need to comply with the procurement policy note 006 or for all type of contracts?
Sorry, I didn't catch the specific notice you said there.
So there is a something which is called PPN 006 for technical standards for completion of carbon reduction plans. So my question is, when you review the carbon reduction plan, do you check that it comply with this guidance, or what are the criteria? What criteria do you use when you review them?
Actually, I'm not familiar with that guidance, so I'll need to check that out and come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah,
Marie?
I just sent the link into the chat box.
Thank you. Is it a public procurement policy note that you're referencing? We call PPNs.
Yeah, PPN stands for
this is something that is for public bodies down south. So if you were bidding down south, this is something that they would need to take into consideration. Scotland has got different policy notes, but
right.
I'll check what the requirements. I think it basically just covers those sort of two templates and when you should use each one, but I'll double check that. But this would be relevant if you're bidding for sort of wider UK stuff for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marie. Thanks, Mandy. And I suppose just you mentioned it there, Mandy, not to put you on the spot, sorry, but about scope 3. It seemed like the majority of things that we discussed probably falls within scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Is it a requirement of, are we seeing it more like or like for public contracts coming in that they're actually looking for like that value chain analysis, or is that not as commonplace yet?
It's not as common, yeah. If it's more the bigger value or the higher impact projects. So I would say like really large scale construction projects potentially it would include that type of detail. For most things it's going to be the scope 1 and 2. But you'll see that in those two different templates is the sort of the basic and then the sort of more in-depth stuff that's required.
No, that's really interesting. I thought that would be the case. Just linking it back to even our funding, we ask for a sort of baseline of carbon emissions, and it is the scope 1 and 2 because it is easier to track. But it's obviously the level of funding that we're handing out is very relatively small scale in terms of, you know, the contracts potentially that you see these large scale construction contracts where that scope 3 calculation is a requirement. But it's just good to know actually if that is something that might be more relevant, and is there any way we can tailor our support at Business Gateway to help businesses do that calculation, because it's massive, isn't it? It's a huge bit of work.
That's huge. And that company that I mentioned, Litmus, and there's lots of companies like that you can work with that can really dig down into your data and help to, you know, do the carbon accounting thing. And it's a bit more complex when you start to look within your supply chain. And it's not something that's required for every tender just now, but you know, as we move on, there is going to be higher expectations. So I would say get as much intelligence as you can up front. Really, it's not easy to get that from your whole supply chain, especially if it's a complex one. But yeah, I think more and more we will be required to. I think data is so available now, isn't it, as well? So it's harder to sort of hide behind bold claims but not put substance behind them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's super helpful as well. We've just got a wee comment there from Nicola as well. Just, I don't know if you can see that, Mandy, just saying thanks that you have been discussing this topic during your meetings and you've learned a lot today, which is really, that's good feedback. So we will share also the recording of this and our my contact details. So if there is anything further, feel free to get in touch with us. Yeah, because we're, like I said, we're here to support you regardless of what stage of business that you're at, and hopefully we can sort of link in with our consultants. It's probably worth mentioning here actually that Mandy obviously work with Intend, and part of the Business Gateway support is businesses can get like an hour surgery with Intend, which has been quite popular. So if that's something that you think could be of benefit to you, then do reach out to us and we can see about maybe teeing that up as well.
Yeah, and I'll try and make sure my Teams is working if we do that 1 hour session, because that was a bit of a nightmare. So I do apologise for that at the beginning, but hopefully the presentation was worthwhile for everyone today. And if there is any questions, just let me know.
Perfect. No,
When
thank
we
you so
send
much.
the slides as well, I've got an updated version, so all the little icons on that slide with the signposting, they all now have clickable links, so you can go right out to that information. And like I said, the West Lothian Invest in West Lothian one is actually a really good starting point. I would go to that first because there's a lot of good stuff on there. So yeah, definitely do that and
Yeah.
go away and actually use the tools, because as I said, you know, we only have an hour and a half today, so we're not going to get to a point where you've got your whole sustainability strategy thought out, but use it as a starting point to move forward.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, if there isn't any more questions, I think that's us probably done for today. But like I said, if something comes to you later on, do reach out. We'll circulate the slides and you'll have some contact email on there as well. So you can always come back to us with any other questions. But apart from that, just to thank everyone for coming along today, and thank you to Mandy as well. That was a really great session and hope you all got something out of it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Right, thanks again. Bye.
Bye.